I do not know what the problem is tonight. Okay, YouTube should be up now. There was no sound for a second there. The sound should be back now. I had it up for a second, then I tried quick turn it back off to fix the title. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Cindy. Alright, this should not be about Trinity Churchyard tonight. This is about the Chicago Insurrection plot of 1864. Some places are getting the right title, some places are not. One of those days. Okay, yeah, I think I got YouTube working. Might even have the correct title. Reminds me I gotta put up a Patreon post for tomorrow. Still no sound on YouTube, that is weird. Carrie on YouTube, I am just drinking some bourbon tonight. I think Carrie can hear me out there. It's a long, every time I have to drive to or from Cleveland is a long day, and I've got a lot of that coming up. So be watching for more Cleveland tours, though usually I don't get to do any touristy stuff in Cleveland, to the extent that there is some. Alright, YouTube is fine now. Alright. I say I love you dearly, for I am yours sincerely with all my heart. Hey, Keely. All I'll ever care for with all my heart. Hello, Gwendolyn. Hey, everybody. Well, welcome along. Welcome to Hey, Donna. Hey, Chris. Yeah, you know, normally I think all astrology is basically bullshit, but Mercury in retrograde, that's legit. Like Emo Phillips says, I can always use astrology to tell whether a relationship will work out. If she believes in astrology, it won't work out. Hey, Tom. Hey, Eric. Never did find a rest stop with the poop stickers heading west. Have to pick it up when we're heading east again in a couple of days.
Benny Goodman goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walk, Jenny Walk.
Evening, Katie.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
You know, if you ever find Uranus jokes unfunny, your heart's probably dead. And Jackson is my donut tour guide. I know Jackson. I know Jackson from Charmers. Hey, Dave. Hey, Mary. No, I do not need this weather year-round. It's still too warm for me. Too many people out and about. We'll let Benny do a little bit more music here. We got off to a little bit of a late start. Oh, Karen, that's interesting. Hey, Megan. Hey, Kathleen and Debbie. Hey, Kira. Hey, Joyce. I don't know where I put my phone. It's a bit of a problem. So I wanted to show you guys a picture I got of this poop-related billboard. Doreen, that's tomorrow. Let's let Benny do one more tune.
And they all loved it.
That's just how I feel today. We got off to a bit of a late start. And yeah, this does happen to be a good day for seditious conspiracy stuff. No, Bob the Poop was not with me today. I tried a rest stop or two on the way back. But nope, didn't find those stickers again. But I did find it. I'll just do this the old way and hold up the picture on the phone. See, around Cleveland, they got these billboards for Mr. Rooter. Is that Mr. Rooter? Or is that the person who took this massive dump? Hey, Luann. Hey, Mike. Hey, Beth. Hey, Larry. Welcome along, everybody. We're getting off to a little bit of a late start today. Just a couple of days. A couple of minutes. It's been a wide one for me. Wide one. Oh, what a day, what a day, what a day. We'll give this a second. Been a long day. May is always a busy month for me. A busy and yet remarkably unproductive kind of month. But I think next week the book I Beat Up Charles Dickens I'm going to go ahead and put out. That'll be kind of a test thing to see about getting up a 10th anniversary edition of Ghosts of Chicago. All right, that is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, right about across the street from where the National Committee would have met in 1864, and we will cover today on Treason! Chicago and the 1864 Insurrection plot. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian for going on 20 years here in Chicago. Got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, The Book, Murder Maps USA, new from Thames and Hudson, and the new Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, new from University of Illinois Press. But I'm also on History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. Did an interview with the Tribune earlier today about an upcoming H.H. Holmes article, and told the stories about the many times I've been all set to go be a talking head until I sent them my notes on their talking points, at which point they stopped talking to me altogether. So, all right, everybody, welcome along. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Let's We're going to go right into this. Today is an excellent day to be talking about seditious conspiracies. There's just been a major conviction in that case, even from people in a Baltimore hotel, which has broader implications because the White House was quite a lot closer to the action than a Baltimore hotel. I don't know how much you're all following the news. I wasn't able to follow too much of it today because I was making a very, very boring drive. There's really nothing that comes up in between Chicago and Cleveland. But all right, everybody, I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Today we are talking about Camp Douglas, the Civil War prison camp that operated here in Chicago, and the conspiracy theory, the conspiracy plan that was to liberate all of the prisoners, take over Chicago, and destroy the Union around the time of the election in 1864. So to start out with, we're just going to show the space where this Confederate prisoner of war camp was. It was all down around here, down at around 31st Street. And I'll show a whole map of everything in a second, but this is what the area looks like today. It's also right on the spot right here where the Lincoln Gardens Jazz Club stood back in the 20s and 30s. It is quite possible that right around here, Louis Armstrong smoked his first joint. The first of many. Now, this facility, what became to be known as Camp Douglas, because it was land owned by Senator Douglas before his death, looked about like this. You can see it went right along the lake shore, right up to the lake. About 80 acres altogether. Now, over the course of the Civil War, this place started out its life as a training facility for Union soldiers, but once the war really got underway, it became Camp Douglas, a prison facility that over the course of its career held something like 15,000 prisoners at different times. It was a very rough place to be, but really probably par for the course as Civil War prison camps go, but it's difficult to know. There are a lot of conflicting reports about stuff like this. One of those things we'll never really know for sure. But here's an interesting thing, is any historian who looks at this map of Camp Douglas, a lot of us see this where it says graves, like, ooh, that must be where they buried the people. That was not, in fact, the case. That was actually just the home of Henry Graves. Now, when Camp Douglas was being built, right in the middle of it was the little modest home of Henry Graves, a racehorse gambler, a racehorse breeder, who just didn't want to move, so they built the entire thing around him, and he just kind of lived in a Civil War prison camp. He is best remembered in Chicago today for having commissioned the statue Eternal Silence at Graceland Cemetery for his own family plot. Specifically wished this monument to be the most substantial and imposing that the funds set aside will allow. His own politics, he always said he never got mixed up in politics. He did name his favorite racehorse after a guy named Ike Cook, who famously said in the 1850s that truth squashed to the ground will rise up again. The truth he was referring to, though, was he had just been shouted down for white supremacy. But Camp Douglas, named after Senator Douglas, perhaps best known for being Lincoln's debate partner. And now, inside of his tomb, which is roughly on the grounds here, there are brochures about him on the sarcophagus. I've never been able to do a proper morning mini tour of this. I filmed it a little bit, but the gate is never open when it's supposed to be, partly because I don't think very many people want to go to see it. Whoever's running this place has got a really cushy job. They can just kind of sit back. Maybe every now and then, every few days, they might have to open the gate, but if they don't, it's really unlikely that anybody's going to notice. But the other day, we were at James Garfield's tomb and noticed that right now the display case is empty, but normally features a box of James Garfield brand laxative tea. At least it's not right on the coffin, whereas this is brochures right on the sarcophagus. So, Camp Douglas. This is a very common shot of Camp Douglas prisoners, though I believe a book is about to come out indicating that these were not, in fact, Camp Douglas prisoners. There's a whole other story to it. We'll just keep it up here for now. But again, it was just swarming with people, and by no account was it ever a nice place. Civil War prison camps just generally were not. Now, one of the first prisoners brought here was a guy by the name of Henry Morton Stanley. And he later said, "Our buildings were swarming with vermin. The dust sweepings were alive with them. The men began to suffer from disorders. Dysentery and typhus began to rage. Day after day my company steadily diminished, and every morning I had to see them carried in their blankets to the hospital, whence none ever returned. Exhumed corpses could not have presented anything more hideous." So, it's hard to get our heads around what this would have been like for people, and even what life had been like for these people before they got involved in the army. A lot of these, I'm on the record as being particularly anti-Confederate. But you got to remember, these were mostly just kids who had gotten drafted. These are kids who had held all this stuff just rigidly piled into their heads. In fact, there was a survey done that showed a considerable proportion, perhaps a majority, devoutly believed that Abraham Lincoln was black. Others believed that his wife was, or that Hannibal Hamlin, the vice president, was. This was, there were a lot more newspapers back then, but if you didn't live in a large city, you didn't have access to a whole lot of information in those days. You heard a lot of hearsay. You had a lot of stuff that you would get secondhand or from one probably horrible paper in the South. Finding dissenting opinions and finding other information would have been very difficult for these people. Let's just kind of take a look around here. We'll look around the space as it appears now. We just saw this. They have done occasional archaeological digs around here. Mostly they found like the occasional brick. This stuff is really long gone. For a long time there were actual houses built here at one point. Now it's just kind of parkland. But it would have been right about here would have been Mr. Graves' house. All on land that was owned by Mr. Douglas. There's the crypt again. All right, so you have about 15,000 prisoners here overall, not at any one time. There were probably 4,000 or 5,000 at any given time. Meanwhile, down in Virginia was the Confederate cabinet. Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, all of these guys who didn't last long as a nation, but sure knew how to dress. I will give them that. I say the same thing about Roger Stone. That guy can dress. But here we have Thomas Hines was, in February of 1864, Thomas Hines, who was a Confederate spy and freelancer, met with Jefferson Davis and said, you know what we ought to do is we ought to establish a foothold, real sneaky-like, in Chicago, because I happen to know there's a lot of Confederate sympathizers in Chicago because they all read Wilbur F. Story's Chicago Times. The Chicago Times was the anti-Lincoln paper. Story famously described the Gettysburg Address as silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances. This is what they published in the Chicago Times at the day that the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. History does not make us acquainted with so deplorable a failure as this administration. It has never demanded men, but more were forthcoming than it desired. It has never asked for money, but its lap was filled to overflowing. With these unlimited means and nearly 2 years of warfare, behold the result, behold the prospect. This is a paper that called the Emancipation Proclamation the wickedest deed in the annals of history. In fact, so treasonous was this paper that Ambrose Burnside ordered it to be shut down. Best known for his sideburns, which is probably the most polite way to remember him based on his career. Lincoln himself stepped in and said, no, we don't do that around here. You let them resume. So to celebrate, Wilbur F. Story published a parody of the battle cry of freedom that was all about white rights. For the rights of white men only and maintain the law, shouting the battle cry of freedom. So Hines went to report on all of this stuff to Jefferson Davis, and then just to show how good he was at sneaking into things, he actually managed to shake the hand of Abraham Lincoln. Wrote back, said there's all this great Copperhead stuff in Chicago. Here's what we got to do. We'll go to Toronto and get things set up. Now, Toronto, just over the border into Canada, about 24 hours away by rail from Chicago, was a place called the Queen's Hotel in Toronto, which was fairly similar to like Rick's Cafe American in Casablanca. It was neutral ground. There were people of both the Union and the Confederate Army here, plus a whole lot of cast-offs, escapees, and exiles who all claimed to have valuable information that they were plotting to sell. There were all kinds of plots going on at any given time. Most of it was probably totally valueless information. But among the people hanging out here was a guy who had been exiled, a member of the House of Representatives from Ohio, like Jim Jordan, who was providing aid and comfort to insurrectionists and treason, like Jim Jordan. It was a guy by the name of Clement Vallandigham, who was eventually exiled. So while in Canada, he tried to run for governor of Ohio from a state of exile, but lost. But having lost, he joined a group called the Sons of Liberty. You know, they always have names like this. Like the insurrectionists from January 6th always called themselves patriots, we the people, all of that shit. The Sons of Liberty were effectively the exact same thing. They would just get together at various places and plot to overthrow the Union. They would talk about how bad the Union was and how great the South was and how slavery was just incredibly keen. But Vallandigham was hanging around here, which is where he met Thomas Hines, and where he met an English soldier of fortune named George Grenfell. Together, these three guys sat around and plotted about what they could do in Chicago. Meanwhile, back in Chicago itself, the Sons of Liberty had a couple of meeting places. One was right about where this Walgreens is now, and then they moved to a space just about a block away, right about over here at about Dearborn and Randolph. See, the Goodman Theater will be just to the right of this, right across from the old Iroquois Theater alley. So the Sons of Liberty would have their meetings here, including a guy by the name of Charles Walsh, who said, I've got a plan. I'm going to start drilling soldiers. We're going to get a plan here. What we should do is we should bust the people out of Camp Douglas. Then we'll take over the city with them. One of the other members was a guy by the name of Buckner Stith Morris, who was the second mayor of Chicago about a generation before, who famously said that if they could break the prisoners out of Camp Douglas, they could send those abolitionists to hell in a handbasket. Now, this is generally recognized as the first recorded use of the phrase hell in a handbasket. We know that he said it at these meetings from two sources. One is later transcripts from his trial, and the other is because a pretty good portion of the people attending those meetings were actually embedded spies, including a guy by the name of Dr. I.W. Ayers, who later wrote 2 books about his experiences with this. At these Sons of Liberty meetings, they would mostly just sit around and talk about how awful the Union was, how wonderful the South was, and how much they loved slavery. Now, Charles Walsh had previously been a candidate for sheriff in Chicago for a while. Sometime around 1863, he really got radicalized. This all started to coalesce around the Democratic National Convention of 1864. This is where they were set up. So, back at Camp Douglas, conditions had gotten absolutely deplorable. Part of the reason for this was that Lincoln wouldn't agree to prisoner transfers. Part of the reason for that was the Battle of the Crater. Now, the Battle of the Crater was a thing where they had blown up a Confederate fort from underneath. This was one of the first major offensives that used a great number of black soldiers for the Union, but it didn't work out too well. There were a lot of people who were captured and killed. The Confederacy refused to think of black soldiers as actual soldiers. They did not consider them real prisoners of war. They would just shoot them or sell them into slavery. So Lincoln refused to do prisoner transfers for the Confederacy until they stopped doing that, and they wouldn't stop doing that. So B.J. Swift arrived in this place. It was getting more and more crowded because of the lack of prisoner transfers. He arrived in May of 1864, ordered the building of more buildings, ordered more hospitals, ordered the prisoners there to get as much care as possible, but funds were low, the priority was low, and without the prisoner transfers, things got even worse. Meanwhile, the Democratic National Convention was coming to Chicago. It's a little bit different than back then. If you read a lot of Democratic papers from then, the Democrats also frequently referred to themselves as the conservatives. Democratic media from the 1850s and 1860s reads exactly like right-wing media today, only they say abolitionist instead of Antifa and the N-word instead of woke. But the Democrats met in Chicago that year to nominate General McClellan as their candidate for president. William Bross, Chicago newspaper editor, said the gloom that pervaded the whole country was especially thick and murky in Chicago. Here. The Copperheads were venomous, whisperings of blood running through the streets ankle deep, and lampposts bearing black Republican fruit with the gloom that were in the air. I sat often at my window on Michigan Avenue and saw the filthy stream of degraded humanity swagger along to the wigwam on the lakeshore. That would be this. And wondered how the city could be saved from bullet burning and plunder. But we knew that General Sweet had squads of men with signs and passwords in all the alleys ready to concentrate at a moment's notice. Around the corner was the Richmond House at Michigan and Lake. Now, all of those guys previously mentioned, guys like Thomas Hines, Clement Vallandigham, who attended pretty openly and even gave some speeches at the convention to a mixture of cheers and boos. Charles Waltz, were all there to cheer McClellan on. Now, the plan was that they would start disrupting things right about then, but Hines arrived and found that Mr. Walsh had not actually started training anybody. So they all got their heads together and said, okay, what can we do? We're not ready for anything yet. And then they decided, well, we've nominated McClellan. Lincoln doesn't have a chance anyway. McClellan's going to get nominated. He'll cut a deal with the South to stop all of the fighting, so we might as well just wait the whole thing out. But then, fall of 1864, Atlanta was captured. This really turned the tide. After this point, everybody kind of knew that it was just a matter of time. So, with it looking like Lincoln was going to be reelected after all, thoughts returned to Camp Douglas. Charles Walsh started actually doing some training of people. They started making plans of where they were going to stash the guns, who was going to take out which wall of the fort. Here's a people. Sometimes one of these guys is identified as a guy named John T. Shanks. It's definitely not really him, but we'll put up the picture anyway. But John T. Shanks was a Union man in Texas, but he was drafted and forced into the Confederate Army. Upon being captured, he said, all right. He went right up to General Sweet and said, listen, I'm actually a Union guy. Would you like a spy? So Sweet sent him to the home of Buckner Stith Morris, and his house at the time would have been down here on West Washington. Now, what we know from the trial is that Mr. Morris would kind of step out of the room when anything really treasonous had to happen, but let his wife handle everything. His wife gave Mr. Shanks the address of a place called Geary Clothing, where he was given disguises and everything else that he needed. He managed to talk his way as a spy right into the high command of the Sons of Liberty without too much trouble. This would have been Geary's place. Now, the plan was that they were going to break all the prisoners out of the jail, then cut the telegraph wires, take over the courthouse, stuff the ballot boxes, and if that didn't work, just burn down the city of Chicago. So, this would have at the very least thrown the country into chaos at that point. And rumors that something like this was afoot had been going around Chicago quite a bit. Up here on top of this grave, there's a much smaller one up at the top, which is the grave of a woman by the name of Anne Hosmer. Her son Charles Hosmer was one of the Chicago's Zouaves in the war. She ran the Soldiers' Home, was the manager of it. And in her unpublished memoir, she wrote, "The day of the election was much dreaded by all. Rumors were that the city would be burned. Those were days of great anxiety, and I felt we were living on a volcano, ready to burst any moment." So the Chicago had become a particular target, and by then there were all kinds of conspiracies going around about the election, mostly in the Chicago Times. Here's October. Plots of old Abe to carry the election in Illinois. No one but loyal men will be allowed to vote. Horrible sufferings of Union prisoners that Abe might release, but will not. And the conspiracy of this administration, every day more and more we can see that they're just cheating. If Lincoln's re-election is based on the votes of Louisiana, Tennessee, or Arkansas, his inauguration should be resisted. Or the Army vote, abolition plot at Baltimore and Washington, frauds by administrationists. And a new abolition dodge, rebel prisoners released to vote for Lincoln. Most likely, absolutely none of this stuff actually happened. But this is what was going on at the Richmond House. Right before the election, at the Richmond House, there was another meeting of Thomas Hines, George Grenfell, Clement Vallandigham. A guy by the name of Colonel Marmaduke showed up there as well. But all of this had already gotten back to General Sweet by then. So, the day that it was all supposed to happen, he ran a massive raid. Now, there's some conflicting accounts as to who was where. But according to Sweet at the trial, he sprang right into action. Right across the street from camp was the home of Mr. Walsh, which was found to contain a whole stack of guns. Now, it's hard to get the exact location. It was probably right in this little neighborhood called Groveland, a little bit south of the camp. Thomas Hines managed to escape because when the feds showed up, he was hiding in a rolled-up mattress. Managed to get away for a while. A few guys were over here on Adams. And over here at the Madison house, they found a number of the firearms that had been stashed. The idea being that they would break the prisoners out, bust into these places where the guns were being stashed, right next to the Sons of Liberty place, and take over the city. Now, the conspiracy definitely existed on paper. Plans were afoot, weapons were stashed. The big controversy is whether they actually could have had a plan with this. Now, these prisoners were in pretty bad shape. They were half starved. A few of them reminisced later saying, we'd been organized into companies, we were all set to go, but it seems unlikely that they would have been in any kind of condition to actually pull any of this stuff off. But it definitely made the news. The rebel plot, confession of Charles Walsh, details of the plan, the Poles to be invaded, the prisoners at Camp Douglas to be set free, the general sack of the city intended, plunder, rapine, fire, bloodshed in the streets of Chicago, the city to be laid in ruins, the schemes of Jeff Davis, McClellan, Pendleton, and co. defeated. Now, to mix McClellan in with this is a little bit of a stretch. But this is kind of how the reaction went. Sweet was greeted as a hero, except in papers that just weren't buying the thing. Places like the Chicago Times. The Chicago Times said the arms found in the house were placed there by abolitionist plotters. So no, this is the 1864 equivalent of saying it wasn't really us, it was really Antifa that was planting all of the guns. Now, right now, General Sweet is right behind Wilbur F. Story at Rose Hill Cemetery, like he's keeping an eye on him. This is a fun one, especially if we take it to be about the modern versions of the parties. Especially like this word in the subhead, shottyites. Shottyites was a term that would come up at the time. Those who were into shoddy things. It would not connected to any particular person named Mr. Shoddy or anything. But a lot of people did say that the whole thing was just a plot to make Confederates look bad. Sweet especially said, we are going to be protecting we will, if necessary to prevent or suppress a riot, I will not hesitate to call in military assistance, but soldiers entitled to vote are expected to do so in the manner of other citizens, to vote for the candidate of their choice. And then after Lincoln won, here's what the Chicago Times said. Their victory. Misters Abolitionists, you have won the election. We shall not now inquire by what agency. A few days will reveal them. And disclose also the appropriate action to be taken by your opponents in relation thereto. Suppose, however, your triumph is legitimate, blah, blah, blah. So down around here on Madison, the trials were held, or some of them. Quite a few people were arrested and brought to trial for this. It's an image of the trial. Everybody was gathered around. And here's charge number 2, conspiring in violation of the laws of war to lay waste and destroy the city of Chicago. This is the said Charles Walsh, Buckner Stith Morris, Vincent Marmaduke, R.T. Sims, Travis Daniel, George Cantrill, George St. Ledger Grenfell, and Benjamin Anderson did unlawfully and secretly conspire and agree among themselves and with one Captain Hines, so-called Dr. Hunter of the Confederate Army, etc., etc. Now, Buckner Stith Morris was eventually acquitted of this. They ruled that every time he had to do something illegal, he would have his wife do it instead. And his wife was exiled at one point. Honestly, I really think they should have found this guy guilty. They went too easy on most of these people. And really, I think a lot of our national problems today are the fact that they went way too easy on the South after the Civil War in an effort to just let bygones be bygones and move on. But others were sent to the Dry Tortugas prison off the coast of Key West. Among those were George Grenfell, who ended up sharing space here in the jail with Samuel Mudd, the doctor who set John Wilkes Booth's leg. Now, the phrase, your name will be Mudd, was already current before Samuel Mudd made the news, but that probably helped make it more of a thing. Now, George Grenfell tried to escape from this prison, which was, as you can see, was on an island. For years, there were stories of him turning up at various places all over the world. Most likely they're fake. Most likely he died in the attempt, but it's one of those things where nobody really knows for sure. Now, this is one of the shorter ones. We'll just cover a little bit of where these people ended up. Buckner Stith Morris is unmarked. Rose Hill Cemetery. Here's General B.J. Sweet, very young at the time that he took over as a head of Camp Douglas. This is his daughter, who became a Union paymaster, one of the first women to hold an office like that. And his other daughter, Winifred, who became a major newspaper reporter, especially remembered for her coverage of the trial of Harry Thaw for the murder of Stanford White, the architect. It's usually said that during that trial, the term sob sister was coined about reporters like her. It's one of those things where trying to find the actual source on it is a real trick. And as mentioned, right on the other side of General Sweet is Wilbur F. Story, still having an eye kept on him after all this time. I promised Rose Hill I wouldn't keep showing doing the dance thing, but you all know where it is. But all right, so that's a bit of a shorter one, I admit. I always feel like that one's going to go a lot longer than it does. But next week, we're going to be doing True Crime in Chicago Cemeteries as a virtual tour. That'll be May 11th, a week from today, 8 p.m. There are 2 in-person ones coming up with tickets available. I haven't added the second one onto Facebook yet. I need to do that immediately, or I'll do it in the morning. But May 6th, Dark History on Taylor Street. That's going to be this Saturday evening on Taylor Street in the West Loop area. It is a really nice area. It's great for walking. It's going to be a great time of year to be doing it. I'm very excited to do this one again for the first time in a couple of years. Then next Sunday, which I just realized was Mother's Day, but what better gift for Mother's Day than to take your mom on Grave Robbing 101 right here in Lincoln Park in Chicago. So you can find tickets for all of these things on MysteriousChicago.com, and of course the virtual events are always free. Tomorrow night at 7 p.m. we'll be doing Whiskey and a Cookie on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page. And with that, everybody, we will just put this back up and just hang out like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I am Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours, and here is Benny Goodman and his orchestra live at the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago.
And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
All right, Grave Robbing 101 is already up on the webpage. I just haven't added it to Facebook yet. I probably shouldn't go on too long tonight when I'm mixing up words as badly as I am. I forget what Miles went too. But we'll do that in a minute. Yes, it is the Taylor Street Tour, not the Taylor Swift Tour. The Dark History of Taylor Swift Tour, we just be talking about the Reputation album the whole time. Hey, Katie. We'll find Miles in a second. Miguel, the tour for Mother's Day is Grave Robbing 101. Perfect for moms everywhere. John Waters is a reasonable trade. Grave robbing 201 I need better insurance for. Let me go buy Miles. Here's our guy. Yes, on May the 4th, we remind you that not all the rebels were the good guys.
That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
And he was sitting on a suitcase. Where there's a suitcase, there'll be a Miles. He loves sitting on suitcases, Miles. I think all cats love sitting on suitcases. Debbie, no, we do not take the cats when we go to Ohio. We got a friend who comes in and takes care of them. They're well, they get plenty of playtime and plenty of treats when we're out. Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah, tomorrow I do plan to do Find a Grave, Carol. Tired though I am.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward.
Hopefully I'll be able to get a good night's sleep tonight. Well, John, come on out for Find a Grave tomorrow. I haven't figured out where I'm going yet. All over town. The thing about opening the couch tomb is it would take all the fun out of it. Oh, Gary, that sounds good. Everybody's trucking. No school tomorrow, that's nice. All over town. That's a good amount of whiskey, Gary. Should have brought some to Ohio with me. There's always next trip. We'll be back in a few days.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Congrats to your kid, Karen. Good night, Bob. Carol Layton will be done with the school year in about a week. Miles. Ow. We do appreciate all the good vibes from Ronnie's mom. I'm not going to go into too many particulars. She's in the hospital right now. And I'm sure she appreciates all of the good wishes. So we'll be back and forth from here to Cleveland for a bit. There's not too much I can do right now, so Aiden and I came back so we could do various gigs. I'll do the same next week. Yeah, she's getting the best of all care. Cleveland Clinic is excellent. I'm very impressed with Cleveland Clinic. Yeah, she's popped up in person on a couple of tours. Yeah, Kristen, that would be rough. Did the snail fall in love with a bird?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
All right, I'll get through this tune. Yeah, the staff around Cleveland Clinic has just been great. Oh, there goes Priya. I don't know how long she's been back there. I had to let you meet Lenora's cat, Lily, one of these mornings. I probably will. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch your troubles by the toe. If it hollers, let it go. Let it fly away. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It's the saying high and low. Hear it everywhere you go. Any time of day. Big Ben rings it. Carol, it's about 6 hours. Even Mr. Crosby sings it. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch the trouble by the toe. If it hollers, let it go. Let it fly away. I'm going to bed so early tonight. Y'all don't even know. It's only about 5.5 if we're going to downtown. We usually have to go way beyond downtown. All right, have a good night, everybody. I will see you tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday. And until then, everybody, quick plug for the Venmos, etc. You know all that info. Until then, stay spooky, everybody. Have a great night.